Grace to you and peace, and welcome to this evening's faith formation class as we continue our series, Stories That Didn't Make the Felt Bored. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be diving into the book of Judges, which is full of tales too violent, gory, crass, and sexual to have ever been put up on any flannelgraph anywhere. Tonight, we start with a story of toilet humor and assassination. Ehud and King Eglon. So where are we in the narrative? After 40 years wandering in the wilderness following the Exodus, Joshua has led the people into the land of promise, only to find it already occupied. And what follows is a long series of battles between the tribes of Israel and the Canaanites and other residents of that land that would become Israel. And when I say long, I mean long. The book of Joshua details a series of skirmishes against the kings of various Canaanite cities and the division of the land between the 12 tribes. But then comes Judges, and the tribes are still fighting for the land. And then in the book of Samuel, Israel is still at war to take control of the land. And here again, it's worth remembering what we mean when we say the Bible is true. We have to ask, must it be historically accurate in every single detail? Or can it be true in some other way? So tonight we find ourselves early in the book of Judges, describing the time between the entrance into the land of promise under Joshua, who dies near the end of the book bearing his name, and the beginning of the united monarchy. And while this book is called Judges, after those who led the tribes of Israel, a better translation might be chieftains. Whatever we want to call them, the events of this book present some of the best, and by best I mean weirdest, and most gruesome stories, including Jael, we'll talk about her next week, and Samson. It's full of gory battles against enemy kingdoms, but also between the tribes of Israel, and it ends with a bitter civil war, and with the mad tyrant king, Abimelech. In tonight's story, when the Moabite king Eglon oppresses the people of Israel for 18 years, they cry out to God for a deliverer. And they get Ehud, a judge, again closer to chieftain, from the tribe of Benjamin, a left-handed man. And that detail will become important later on. Ehud goes before King Eglon with an entire entourage to offer Israel's tribute, a sort of tax of treasures and fine goods paid by a nation to a conquering king. And after he presents the treasures, Ehud sends the rest of his entourage away, before telling the king, "I have a secret message for you." Eager to hear this message, the king sends away his own courtiers. And Ehud repeats, "I have a secret message for you from God." And Eglon stands up to hear this oracle. Now there are 2 things you need to know. The first is that King Eglon is very, very, very obese. And second, Ehud has strapped a short sword to his right leg. And so as Ehud approaches the king to whisper the message in his majesty's ear, he reaches down with his left hand and pulls the sword from its hiding place before plunging it into the king's side, where a roll of fat promptly overtakes the hilt and pushes the blade further in. And after that, Ehud calmly walks out, and he closes the door of the chamber behind him. The blade stays in Eglon's side, and it pierces his bowels. And outside, the unsuspecting guards smell the stench of a bathroom. They assume that the king is relieving himself, and only after too much time, a suspicious amount of time, has passed, do they go in to check on him, and they find him dead on the floor. The rabbinic commentary Ruth Rabbah suggests that Eglon is Ruth's father, and that puts this Moabite king in David's lineage. That's not really important to the story, it's just an interesting footnote with nowhere else to go. So instead of other stories of noble warrior heroes stabbing kings in the bathroom, let's look at the narrative structure of Judges. Many of the stories in this book follow a set four-part pattern. First, Israel falls away from the Lord and does what is wicked. Second, because of this wickedness, Israel is handed over to their enemies for a time. Third, in the face of suffering, they call to the Lord for help. And fourth and finally, despite their prior lack of faithfulness, the Lord remains steadfast and delivers them. In the story of Ehud, we get those first two acts in verse 12. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord strengthened King Eglon of Moab against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Then, after 18 years of suffering under King Eglon, we get the second two acts in verse 15. But when the Israelites cried out to the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. The rest of the story details what form Israel's deliverance takes. In this case, a warrior kills a king in a gruesome way. All's well, and then at the start of chapter 4, the cycle starts over again. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly for 20 years. And enter their deliverance, Deborah the prophet. So the cycle goes on, over and over and over and over again throughout the entire book. So what is there to say about this story? It is over the top, with gory details and a darkly scatological sense of humor. It is the type of story that were it to pop up in a blockbuster movie, it would earn an R rating, and it would draw in loads of 15 to 24-year-olds, but it would elicit horrified tisk-tisks of disapproval from many churchgoers. It's like if National Lampoon's or Seth Rogen wrote the Bible. In fact, if I were to compare it directly with another story, I would probably say it's most like the controversial and crass action comedy The Interview, about an attempt to assassinate a dictator. Pastoral disclaimer: I am not recommending that movie to anyone under any circumstance. But that makes this story's inclusion in the canon all the more shocking. If anything, this story is a reminder that Scripture remains rooted in its cultural context. The book of Judges especially brings in some of these coarse and gory elements. If you haven't read it in a while, go revisit the story of Samson. It is not nearly as kid-friendly as you remember from the felt board. A lot of the stories, especially in Judges, seem more at home in the violent pantheon of the Greco-Roman and ancient Mediterranean worlds than they do in the Bible. This is not the stuff of precious moment figurines. So what do we make with stories like this? The truth be told, I'm not sure there is a single good answer. We're going to see some really dark and violent imagery in the next couple of weeks as we read through the stories in Judges and elsewhere. The humor will go from scatological to non-existent. And we'll try to ask something along the lines of, where is God in all of this? But that's something we'll have to wrestle with, like Jacob struggling against the angel. And we might not ever arrive at a satisfying answer.